Mingla before we begin the event, I would like to take a few minutes to start with a short tribute to Benin of Tanintharyi in Chin State. Tanintharyi is a small town where more than 10,000 people live. The town is still on fire by the shelling of rocket propelled grenade. This is genocide for our indigenous people from Chin State. This ad shows how the Myanmar military is wiping out indigenous people from our land. We will never forget it. We stand with our brothers and sisters from Chin State. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our very important webinar. This is an opportunity to hear about how the current situation is affecting indigenous people in Myanmar. They will highlight their struggle to combat climate change and share their solutions for moving forward during what is an extreme situation in our country. 9 months since the military staged the coup, this is one of the few times you are hearing directly from different indigenous friends discuss the crisis, its impacts on the environment, and set out their responses. Our indigenous communities were marginalized and have had barely paid attention before the coup, but now they are being completely ignored, even though they have been actively contributed in multiple and important ways to combat climate change. At this moment, they are taking a risk to use their voices so that the international community takes notice and will understand the importance of indigenous people participation in the struggle to protect their forests, land, rivers, and rights, and the importance of that for the global community. So, with this in mind, I would like to explain the agenda, introduce the panelists, and the logistics for the platform today. Today's program has 7 parts. First, Pooven Moodley will explain about the international perspectives and global overview. Secondly, now Esther Wah will give an overview of Myanmar's climate projections, targets, and commitment. Then you will see the inspired documentary film that our Indigenous Peoples Network prepared. Following that, 3 different case studies will be presented by Frank Abreu, Paul Centra, and Pong. These case studies are from the southern part of Myanmar from Tanintharyi, northern part of Myanmar from Kachin, and from the southeastern area current state. To conclude, Htoo will give an update in Myanmar and a series of the recommended options for taking actions. Then the floor will be open for the audience for taking questions. For a question and answer session, the panelists will answer your questions directly for 30 minutes. Therefore, please type your question into the Q&A chat box and address to the name of the speaker that you want to ask. Those who would like to ask directly to the speaker, please raise your hand so that we will let you ask in the end of the session. For the Myanmar speaker, you can also raise your question in Myanmar language. As we prepare for simultaneous translation, please see the translation notes in the chat box. For those who use in the Myanmar language user, you have to click on the icon Spanish, and for the English speaker, you have to click on the English icon. Let me explain a bit in Myanmar for a few points. So, မင်္ဂလာပါဆရာတို့ဆရာမတို့ရှင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီအစီအစဉ်မှာပါဝင်ပြီးတော့မှနားထောင်ပေးတဲ့အတွက်အထူးပဲကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီအစီအစဉ်မှာ logistic ဟာလေးကျွန်တော်နည်းနည်းလေးပြောပြပေးချင်ပါတယ်ဆရာတို့ဆရာမတို့ဒီမှာကျွန်တော်တို့တက်ရောက်လာတဲ့ panelist တွေကနေပြီးတော့မှသူတို့တင်ပြဆရာရှိတာတင်ပြပြီးတဲ့အချိန်မှာကျွန်တော်မေးခွန်းမေးမဲ့အချိန်ပြင်ဆင်ထားပေးပါတယ်အဲ့တော့မေးခွန်းမေးတဲ့အချိန်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့ကမြန်မာလိုလဲထားပြပြီးတော့မှ box ထဲမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ထည့်ပြီးတော့မှမေးပြီးလို့ရပါတယ်ရှင်ဒါမှမဟုတ်ဘူး direct မေးချင်တယ်ဆိုရင်လည်းပဲကျွန်တော်တို့လက်ထောင်ထားပေးလို့ရပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ Q&A session အချိန်ကြာရင်ဆရာတို့ဆရာမတို့ကိုမေးဖို့အတွက်အချိန်ပေးပါလိမ့်မယ်အဲ့တော့မြန်မာစကားပြောမြန်မာလိုနားထောင်ချင်တဲ့သူတွေအတွက်ကဒီ interpretation ဆိုပြီးကမ္ဘာလုံးပုံလေးရှိပါတယ်အဲ့တော့အဲ့ကမ္ဘာလုံးပုံလေးမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ Spanish ဆိုတဲ့ icon လေးကိုကျွန်တော်တို့တွားပြီးတော့နှိပ်ပေးရပါမယ်အဲ့ဒါမှကျွန်တော်တို့မြန်မာလိုဘာသာပြန်နေတဲ့ဟာကိုဓာတ်ရိုက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ကြားမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်လို့ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ရှင်So now we will begin the session. And I would like to introduce with the first speaker, Pooven, who is the Executive Director of Natural Justice and ICCA Consortium Council Chair of Defending Territories of Life. His experience spans from the anti-apartheid struggle to working with women's rights to land in Africa, from challenging mining companies to promoting rights to health and education, and supporting movement building. He works closely with indigenous communities in several continents. Hello, Pooven, over to you, please.
Thank you so much. I'd like to just start by just taking a few moments just to acknowledge and recognize the indigenous activists from Myanmar and other countries who have lost their lives over the last few years trying to defend their territories of life, trying to stand up for humanity. So I just want to take a few moments to recognize, acknowledge, and pay respects to people who have lost their lives. Thank you so much. You know, I'm here just to send a message of solidarity. As the introduction said, I'm with Paul and others on the ICCA consortium, working with indigenous and local communities in Africa and other parts of the world. And you know, as we all know, we currently in a state of major crisis on the planet. And many intersecting crises. We have the environmental crisis, we have climate change, we have issues of race and violations. We have patriarchy that's still very much rearing its head. And all of these come together at this time. And many of the science reports speak about a 10-year period in which we need to totally transform the way we live on our planet. Now, most of the indigenous and local communities we work with, make it clear that the window period we have is actually about 4 years to fundamentally transform, the way we live on the planet. So it's not just about trying to shift a few things, but really transforming our relationship with each other, but also our relationship with nature and with the environment. When I was last in Myanmar, which was about 4.5 years ago, spending time with different communities and really understanding, the types of struggles, given the political context, and just given the fact that people are trying to protect what's absolutely crucial, not just for for people living in Myanmar, but what that means for people living, elsewhere. And what we find, especially as we're heading into, crucial climate conference, COP26, is that we have the same people, making the plans, making the decisions. And I think people generally have lost faith in governments, around their willingness, their ability, but also the kind of agenda, because a lot of government policy is now based on multinational companies, and a lot of it is about money. So if you take what's going to happen in Glasgow, many people are sending their finance ministers, for example, so for many countries, this is seen as a financial kind of problem and solution. And if you just take, a few aspects and you start to unpack them, so, countries committing to net zero as one example, part of that is postponing, the solutions by saying, after 2030 and before 2050, we'll start to fundamentally change how we do things. The challenge is, the science and indigenous wisdom tells us that it's going to be too late, because we know sea level increases are already there. We know that the planet's heating. We know that people are already, based on issues of food and so on, are already having to move, from where they live. So in some ways, what's happening is a middle class lens is being used, to deal with the problem as if it's a problem for the future, but it's actually a problem for now because, people are already dealing with these issues, especially indigenous and local communities. So, some of the solutions that are being proposed, these are solutions by companies and governments, so when they talk about net zero by 2050, the bottom line is when you start unpacking that is that, at least 1.6 billion hectares of new forests will be required to reach net zero, which means, this is 5 times the size of India or all of the farmland currently on the planet. So, that's not a sustainable solution because it will mean more violation of rights of indigenous communities. It will mean that there would be more land grabs. So that in itself is not a solution. Or, all of the agreements that were made in terms of the nationally determined contributions and what countries have put forward, after the Paris Agreement, it's so clear that, based on the current science and the most recent UN report that came out last week, is that, based on current commitments, we will reach 2.7 degrees, which is, an unsustainable way to live on the planet. And if we're looking at what's happening, outside of Myanmar and some of the other parts, and we do a lot of work with indigenous and local communities in Africa, is that, companies and governments are seeing the closing window, for example, on fossil fuels. So what they're doing is accelerating, fossil fuels. So, currently we're in court challenging the East Africa oil pipeline, which would be the longest heated pipeline between Uganda and Tanzania that cuts across indigenous territories. The Okavango Delta, where the San community lives, which is one of the oldest people, on the planet. It's their land and their territory that a Canadian company is starting to drill for oil and gas, and one of the most biodiverse regions. So the struggles are very similar and very interconnected. And so some of the key things we are pushing forward collectively as the ICCA consortium and the range of members and heading to COP6 is the recognition to land territories and resources in terms of, what does it mean, in terms of ownership, ancestral land, and how one protects this sustainably. And, one sees what's happening in the Amazon and other places where, you have illegal loggers, poachers, land grabbers, and just a mass consumption culture. The second point is around, consent and meaningful engagement. Often companies or governments say they've consented communities, but what they actually do is, try and speak to a few people or try and put money to divide communities. And we see this happening across the globe. So questions of free, prior, and informed consent, it is about meaningful engagement. But also, part of the work of the ICCA consortium, natural justice, and many other members is looking at the increasing level of threats to environmental and land defenders. And many of these are indigenous activists and defenders. And we are seeing, a sharp rise because we're now at the cutting phase, because, we're at this crossroads that many indigenous communities have predicted for a long time based on different cosmologies that, we now have to make a clear choice. And with defenders trying to protect what's remaining, the threats are certainly increasing. And then the last thing I just want to bring forward is, a big part of our thinking and what we're looking at is how do we decolonize, our thinking, the way we work, the way we operate, and really go back to indigenous knowledge and ancient wisdom, and look at how communities have lived sustainably, but also, all of the communities that have been suppressed and decimated over centuries, how do we ensure that a lot of that knowledge, information comes back into play, because that's a key ingredient and a key part of the puzzle. And so we've been working on initiatives linking activism, ancient wisdom, and alternatives. So just to end by saying, deep gratitude for each one of you that are working immensely, caring a lot in trying to ensure that the violations of rights stop, but ensuring that the planet isn't being decimated more than it already has. So yeah, from our side, just a message of solidarity, and the fact that we are all connected, and nothing stops beyond borders, as companies don't stop beyond borders, people don't stop beyond borders, and we have to work on this together. So yeah, just my deep gratitude to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pooven. Thank you for your excellent overview to understand the global situation. It is a really perfect capture to understand all about it. So I believe there will be some follow-up question for you. And then before I go to the next speaker, I just would like to explain a bit about this event, why we are not turning on the video. Some of the speakers, they were turning on their video, and some of the speakers, they were not turning on their video due to the security issue. So that's I would like to inform about it. Sorry, I didn't inform in the very beginning. So now it is the second speaker that I would like to call for. So it is about to hear the overview of Myanmar's climate projections, targets, and commitment. So I would like to introduce with the speaker, Esther Wah. She is an Indigenous Karen woman who is brave and very active lady as well. She works passionately with the ethnic communities across Myanmar on their rights to protect the land and forest. So Esther Wah, the floor is yours. Over to you, please.
Thank you. Today, I would like to talk about Myanmar's climate projection targets and commitments. So next slide, please. At first, I would like to talk about a little bit of global climate change. Globally, the world is on the brink of an unprecedented crisis. We are now likely to move to global warming of 2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. This will mean huge rise in the sea levels, sinking coastal lands and forests, loss of species, breakdown of agricultural systems, and destruction of local ecological systems. Unless there is rapid and large-scale coordinated action to protect forests and reduce emission, our planet itself is at risk of destruction. Next slide, please. This one, it is the highly vulnerable to impact of climate change in Myanmar. So Myanmar is particularly at risk for rising temperatures. Myanmar has been ranked the third most climate vulnerable country on the planet, and over the past 30 years has suffered 43 extreme weather events, combined with authoritarian military rule. These have been brutal. In 2007, alone over 120,000 people were killed by the cyclone Gates. Also, there are vast number of climate refugees, particularly from the dry zone and the delta area, who have had to leave their lands and livelihoods due to extreme weather change. So next slide, please. So the 26th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The COP26 is a meeting of nations from across the world in Glasgow to talk about commitment to reducing emissions to mitigate the rapid onset of climate change. In Paris Accord in 2015, countries developed nationally determined contributions is called NDC. Each country deciding on the level of emission that they want to cut. The intention is that together, this can stop the temperature rising above 2 degrees. So far, many countries have developed their NDC, and Myanmar also submitted in 2050 and 2021. This year, ahead of the COP26, both the SAC and the NUG have submitted NDC reports. On the UNFCCC website, they have accepted the SAC reports, raising the question of legitimacy for the UNFCCC. When other UN agencies and governments around the world have not recognized the SAC, Why has the UNFCCC choose to do so? This is a question we must ask. So next slide, please. So in 2015, Myanmar submitted an NDC to the UNFCCC at the Paris Accords. This NDC related to the forestry sector and energy sector and aimed to expand permanent forest land to over 40% of land cover and expand hydropower as the primary energy source, as well as development of small-scale renewable energy source for rural electrification. Next slide, please. So this policy and laws in Myanmar, these commitments for other discriminatory laws and policy related to the VFB land law, forest law, which all fall under the 2008 Constitution, in which the state owns all land and resources. These laws do not recognize indigenous territories and prioritize profits over people. While reduction in greenhouse gas emission may be a good thing, expansion of permanent forest estates present risks to indigenous lands and territories. The permanent forest estate is used not to protection, but for logging and plantation concessions. This means that an expansion of the permanent forest estate will result in the grabbing and destruction of indigenous lands and resources, rather than their protection and substances. Next slide, please. And the problems of Myanmar and be seen from the indigenous perspective. Rather than protecting forests and advancing towards climate mitigation, NDCs that were developed by Myanmar actually threatened our forests and future. Myanmar's current law, which NDC is based on, presents significant problems for indigenous communities. They do not protect customary land and tenure rights. The NDC does not address the drivers of deforestation, land grabs, mining, agribusiness, and logging. Its focusing instead on community substance and large-scale energy infrastructure. Then, the NDC failed to take in account the impact of decades of conflicts, including hundreds of thousands of IDPs and refugees in indigenous territories. Then, the NDC prioritized big development and big energy projects over the land and forest land rights. Expansion of top-down protected areas and forest enclosures that grabs indigenous territories. Then, guiding laws and policies do not recognize ethnic armed groups' jurisdictions and therefore undermine principle of federalism. Less of commitment to FPIC and consultation with ethnic and indigenous communities. And there, following the military coup, there is no longer any legitimacy of the SAC government, who try to control the country only with violence and brutality. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, indigenous territories in Myanmar are important for global. It is containing some of the biggest expanse of tropical forests in mainland Southeast Asia, hold over 1,500 million tons of carbon and many globally endangered and vulnerable species. The vast majority is contained within indigenous territories and has been sustained by local management practices. These are all at risk from regressive laws that open up our resources and territories for theft and plunder, and development projects that destroy our nature habitats, our livelihoods, and our lives. Next slide, please. This is the recommendation. The military is the biggest threat to our forest protection and climate change mitigation in Myanmar. Until federal democracy is won, none of our efforts for environment and climate can be realized. The international community must not legitimize the military junta by accepting and honoring any aspect of Myanmar's NDC and related requests for international assistance. NDC must recognize the territories and management system of indigenous communities. Myanmar NDC must be based on the principle of federal democracy and not on the 2008 Constitution and laws and policy that depossesses indigenous people and territories. The NDC must address diverse deforestation, land grabs or indigenous territory, and large development, agribusiness, and mining projects, rather than small-scale livelihoods and forest use practices. Forests are almost exclusively based in ethnic and indigenous, etc. territories. And so climate change mitigation measures must be driven by the indigenous leaders and communities. So the last point is INGO, international governments, UN donor agency, please stand in solidarity with indigenous people and our fight for the forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Noh Esther Wah. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, which make us clear to understand where Myanmar is on the agenda of the climate change. And it's made me think that, why UNFCCC still making a legitimize to the SAC on the NDC issue. It's so terrible. Okay, I'm definitely sure that there will be questions for you from the audience. Now you all already listen globally and countrywide on climate change and indigenous people. So let's dig down a bit to see what are the initiatives of our people through the case studies. Despite the different ways in which the indigenous peoples in Myanmar are combating climate change and pursuing sustainable practices, their voices has been marginalized. Today, you can hear about the real situation on the ground from different indigenous communities and their plan for action with the 3 case studies. The first case study will be presented by one of our prominent indigenous leader, Frank Ambrew. Frank Ambrew has been working in Tanintharyi in armed insurgency conflict areas where power and authority favor financial sources of development that impact the local poor. He has been engaged in research and forest policy development for people, promoting indigenous knowledge and culture. He is going to talk about the case study from the Tanintharyi region, and I will turn over to you, Frank. The floor is yours.
Yes, can you please open the slide, the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, but first we have the documentary to show. Yes.
Sorry, I skipped one of the agenda. Sorry about that. So before we are going to listen to the Frank Ambrew's case study, we have one excellent documentary film prepared by the All Indigenous Network. So that tells us about how we are working hard. Thank you, Emma, for reminding me.
Why many corporations and governments see the forest as a source of economic benefit, indigenous people and communities see the forest as their life. For them, the forest is a healer who provides them with medicine, a parent who provides them with food, and a home which provides them with shelter. It is an essential component of their culture. Therefore, indigenous people and communities play a fundamental role in caring for the forest. Like indigenous peoples around the world, indigenous peoples and communities across Myanmar practice their own local institutions, customary laws and regulations, knowledge and traditions in forest, and nature management to ensure that they can survive and thrive in harmony with Mother Earth. These forests support a rich biodiversity and multitude of globally threatened and endangered species. However, their forests and territories are in danger of disappearing due to unsustainable development projects such as mining operations, monocrop plantation, hydropower dam, and top-down conservation projects proposed by the governments and international conservation organizations. To protect their land, forests, and territories from this threat, indigenous communities in Myanmar have created their own indigenous community conservation areas. For example, in Karen territories, the indigenous Karen people established the Selwyn Peace Park with a total area of over 5,000 square kilometers in eastern Myanmar, and Kamothwe Community Conserve Area, Paglo Landscape, and other community conserved territories across southern Myanmar. Moreover, in Htoo, Kachin state, local indigenous Sawan groups and communities stopped the governments from designating their territory of life as a top-down protected area. Instead, they are working forward to proclaim their territory as the indigenous peoples' conserved area, managing it with their existing traditional and customary practices. In Nagaland, local indigenous groups are working on documenting and mapping different customary tenure systems to advocate the recognition of their indigenous people rights over land and forest management. Likewise, in Kayan, Shan, and Chin states, communities have worked hard to demarcate, document, and establish their community conserved areas, carefully conserving resources and protecting them from harmful and destructive development projects. This consolidation of local efforts to protect their territories of life encompasses community forest, wildlife sanctuaries, sacred site, traditionally prohibited forest, communal land, shifting cultivation, villages, and their customary land and forest governing practices. Their territories overlap with key biodiversity areas. This initiative not only presents an alternative approach to top-down conservation projects, but also maintain large area of forest, thus contribute to the government's commitments to achieve the Paris Agreement's goal and reduce global climate change. However, Myanmar laws give indigenous people no rights to manage their nature resources. With the military coup, it has become much worse. No one has the right to live and speak freely. Our indigenous people have to fight for the right against the military and global capitalism. Given all of the circumstances, how do we manage our future? If the military regime continues to consolidate power, the targets of government's commitments to climate change mitigation and Paris Agreement's goal cannot be achieved. The military regime does not impact only our country, but it also impacts the future of our planet. Indigenous people-driven land and forest management is key to the successful biodiversity protection around the globe. Large, intact, forested areas from Amazonia, the forests of the Congo and Cameroon, to our indigenous territories in Myanmar are key to addressing climate change. Therefore, the tireless effort of indigenous peoples, their rights, their territories, their biodiversity must be recognized in the global action for climate change mitigation and adaptation.
Thank you, Emma. And it's you already watched about the video file that is prepared by our Indigenous network, and you were inspired what we have been done so far and what we are trying as well to move forward. So now I would like to go back to the 3 case study, and the first speaker, Frank Ambrew, it's over to you, please.
So hello everyone, I'm going to talk about the environment and conservation issues in Tanintharyi region. It is related to the case study of top-down conservation project in Tanintharyi. Tanintharyi is located far south of Myanmar. In 2014, we have learned that the Reach to Reef project is financed by the GEF, Global Environment Facility, and implemented by the UNDP in cooperation with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment Conservation and FFI. The project is proposing for an expansion and integrated land and seascape planning and management of Tanintharyi protected area system. Next slide, please. The project has hindered since in the beginning due to lack of understanding to the local context. In 1997, military offensive against the Karen National Union and ethnic armed organization forced villagers to flee their homes and land. Individual and communal lands were taken by the Myanmar military and given to the companies for growing oil palm plantation. After the 2012 preliminary ceasefire agreement has been signed, people wanted to return to their original villages, but often the land had been converted into plantations. Unable to access their lands and abandoned by the government, many villagers were dwelling in nearby forested area. Indeed, most of the forested area under the R2R project has been controlled by the KNU for more than 6 decades. However, the project didn't invite the KNU as a key stakeholder. Next slide, please. The project was hindered by the strong protest of the indigenous people. The indigenous people strongly rejected the R2R project because it failed to consult them before starting, and because it failed to consider the local context and the history of armed conflict in Myanmar. The R2R project will convert ancestral domains lands into a protected area, threatening the already insecure situation of indigenous people. Indigenous people traditionally understand and prefer conservation. However, they will reject if the conservation approach sidelines their ancestral practices of indigenous knowledge and wisdom. In addition, the R2R project follows the top-down logic of the vegan, fallow, and virgin law, ignoring local customary land tenure rights. Next slide, please. Let's see how the local communities respond back to the challenges they face. Between 2015 and 2020, network of indigenous people communities and CSO working with indigenous communities became stronger and better organized. Due to the effort of the indigenous people movement, large projects such as hydropower dam construction, biofuel plantations, and mining activities were stopped. The indigenous people movement is crucial for safeguarding local human rights, as well as protecting the forest and biodiversity in Tanintharyi. Next slide. Let me give you a few case studies. The first one is the Deep Seaport and Special Economic Zone project. In 2008 and 2009, the Italian Thai company signed a MOU with the Myanmar military regime. One of the first stages of the project was clearing local people's land for highway construction. In addition, the planned 2,000 meters wide highway cutting from the coast to the Thailand border threatened to have severe impact on the entire Tanintharyi forest ecosystem. The indigenous communities impacted by the highway construction started organizing to stop the project by doing research, monitoring, education, and advocacy, etc. The Deep Seaport and Special Economic Zone project suffered a lack of foreign investment, but the local community organizing was also an important element contributing to the postponement of the project. Another case study, the next slide, please. Coal mining in Ban Chao Dawei district. In 2012 November, Energy Earth Public Company Limited signed a joint operation agreement with Eastar Company Limited to extract the 40 million tons of coal. Indigenous people there have suffered from water pollution for several years. This project was totally suspended in 2017 due to the strong protest of the indigenous people living in the area. the next case study. Oil palm plantation in Yek district. Again, in 2011, a Malaysian-owned MSPP company was granted a 16,000 hectare land concession by the Myanmar Investment Commission to develop oil palm plantations. The size of the concession could destroy the ancestral land and the fertile forest ecosystem. By the strong protest of the local indigenous people, meant that the company was only able to plant on 2,428 hectares of land. Next case study. Gold mining in the Tanintharyi River. In 2016, a gold mining project operated by a Chinese firm along the Tanintharyi River installed 10 dredgers to extract gold from the river bed. Local people organized against these operations, and the project was totally stopped within 2 years. So please go to the last slide. Impact of the coup, future prospect for indigenous people rights and civil society space. What I have mentioned, the previous efforts of the indigenous people in Tanintharyi within 5 years is engaging towards climate change mitigation. But I'm not sure what will be happen and how extent we can work to promote indigenous people's rights and forest resources sustainability under the brutal military regime. What I can say is, as long as the coup maker is in power, all of the natural resources will be converted into the military spending and the increasing of the general's individual wealth. Finally, all kinds of resources will be exhausted and people will live under poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sia. Thank you so much. Thank you for your great presentation. It's talk about like we are neglected, ignored totally by the project from the above, from the central level. So most of the projects, top-down projects, are trying to shoot us and also trying to neglect where we have been situated. So it gave us thoughts to reflect the action that came from top-down approach without paying attention to the local indigenous people's initiative at all. So I'm sure there will be so many questions for you as well. So before we continue with the next presentation, next case study, I would like to remind to all the audience, if you have a question, you can type into the chat box. So we are collecting the questions to answer in the question and answer session. So let's continue with another interesting case study by our prominent indigenous leader again. I would like to give the floor for Paul Saint-Wah, who is an indigenous Karen from Burma, Myanmar. He is co-founder and director of the Karen Environmental and Social Action Network and president of the Salween Peace Park, which protects the last dam-free main river in Asia and more than 5,400 square kilometers of globally significant biodiversity. The Salween Peace Park was one of the 10 winners of the 2020 Equator Prize, and Paul received the 2020 Goldman Environmental Prize for Asia as well. He is going to show the case in current state and how he is initiated, and let's interest to his case study. So over to you, Paul. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunities. Today, I'm going to present about the future of our forest, Salween Peace Park as a path to Karen climate justice. The Karen are indigenous people from southeastern Burma who act as custodian to a large territory that contains some of the world's largest remaining areas of contiguous tropical forest. This area is of great global importance, both for biodiversity and in mitigating the impacts of the global climate emergency. The Karen communities face many challenges, including conflict, no recognition of their territorial rights, threats from large-scale military-driven development projects, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The February 1st military coup has made things even more challenging, with a wave of terror unleashed on local communities by the Damodar Burma Army, displacing thousands of families from their homes. Climate change adds another layer to an already complex situation. It has brought changes to temperatures and weather that have led to drought, flooding, unpredictable and erratic rainfall patterns, and an increase in plant diseases and agricultural pest populations. With no clear rights at national level and ongoing violence from the Burmese Army, Damodar, Karen communities cannot look to the central government for climate justice. Faced with such challenges, how do we manage our future? There is growing evidence and acceptance in the international communities that Indigenous people and local communities, or RPLCs, play a vital role in protecting our planet. See the reports of World Bank and C4 reports. The reason for this is rooted in the values of RPLCs. The Karen way of life is exemplary of this. Karen communities hold a holistic worldview, seeing everything in the natural world as interconnected and equally important. This includes communities themselves, who are part of nature as a larger whole. This worldview encourages them to maintain sustainable livelihoods in tune with nature, as it is their firm belief that a healthy ecosystem will result in a happy and prosperous community. This is reflected in Karen indigenous knowledge passed on through poetry. So this is our Karen poetries. Based upon this holistic worldview and founded upon their traditional values and vision for a peaceful future, the indigenous Karen communities of Mudra district have built the Selwyn Peace Park, or the SPP. The SPP is an indigenous community conserved nature and cultural area founded upon three pillars of 1. Peace and self-determination, 2. Ecological integrity, and 3. Cultural survival. It unites a 1.3 million acre mosaic of customary core territories, community forests, forest reserves, and wildlife conservation areas. The SPP aims to protect remaining healthy forest areas within its borders, restore forest areas that have been degraded by decades of conflict, and strengthen indigenous governance systems that promote the sustainable use and management of these forests. All of this is guided by the SPP Charter, adopted by popular referendum in 2018, which is built upon principles of community governance, deliberative democracy, indigenous rights, and FPIC. This is supported by the SPP General Assembly, an inclusive governance structure which brings together community representatives, KNU local government actors, and civil society on equal footing. The SPP is an essential landscape skill tool for self-strengthening. The General Assembly and its working groups provide a support network, a place of learning, and a conduit for upscaling community visions of a good and just life. The SPP strengthens communities' ability to govern by supporting them in demarcating their ancestral core territories. This provides tangible security and allows community to better understand their territories and develop more effective adaptation and mitigation strategies to changes in the local environment. The SPP also helps communities maintain a network of 34 community forests. These community forests support local livelihoods and are an important source of NTFPs and herbal medicines. They also encourage the cultivation of different food sources, maintaining a vast variety of different local plant species that contribute to climate change resilience. This is further strengthened through community contingency strategies, including a series of 60 rice banks maintained across the SPP. These rice banks help both in seed saving, ensuring a robust variety of rice crops remain across the region, and help community also survive in times of difficulty. Many communities across the SPP have faced repeated displacement, and the rice banks help them survive without having to resort to converting forests into agricultural land. The SPPs is also a place for communities to learn, especially for the next generation. A cultural curriculum has been developed, sharing traditional approaches that can help communities adapt to climate impacts. Education enables local youth to embrace the indigenous knowledge, teaching them to live in balance and harmony with the natural world. This cultural education is paired with environmental education workshops that seek to educate communities on climate impacts, the importance of forest and nature conservation, and how these topics intertwine with the indigenous ways of life. While the SPP is still young, local communities have conserved their territories using traditional knowledge for generations. The results of current holistic governance are clear to see. The majority of the SPP's land area comprises of ancestral core territories where people live and conduct sustainable livelihoods. Despite the large number of communities living in the area, their traditional livelihoods and respect for nature have allowed them to support themselves while ensuring that 83.9% of the Selwyn Peace Park remains forested. Strong and varied biodiversity is found throughout the SPP's ancestral territories. The local Women's Biodiversity Research Group identified more than 40 different orchid species among customary territories in the north of the SPP, including a new species endemic to the SPP area. Inspired by current holistic values, protected areas and ancestral core territories flow into one another. Kedu Menyor, a protected area in the south of the SPP, has been designed cooperatively and is co-managed by communities and KNU Kotule Forestry Department based on locally developed rules and regulations. The impact of these community-driven conservation measures is clear. Camera trapping exercises conducted in the SPP found healthy populations of endangered, vulnerable, and near-threatened mammals and arboreal mammals, including tigers, gibbons, and pangolins. The presence of these animals living around indigenous Karen communities demonstrates a sizable, healthy, and contiguous forest landscape. Similar evidence can be found in the SPP waterways, which are home to more than 170 fish species, many of which are endemic. Communities maintain 90 fish conservation zones across the SPP, with plans for many more to be established. Alongside these, communities have implemented their own solution to energy access. 9 microhydro generators coupled with household solar panels give communities control over their access to energy and provides them with the benefits of electrification without the environmental cost caused by destructive mega dam projects. By protecting the forest landscape and pursuing clean energy solutions, communities are supporting their own subsistence and the health of future generations. They are also doing an invaluable service to the planet by maintaining a significant area of contiguous tropical forests. The SPP's institutions have played a key role in this by facilitating support in hard times and helping communities learn from each other's experiences, indigenous knowledge. The General Assembly and its working groups also frequently help communities raise their voice to those who seek to encroach upon their holistic way of life. Through this, the General Assembly promotes learning and solidarity and strengthens community bargaining power. Faced with many challenges, both from natural disasters and a government that seeks to steal their territory, nullify their voice, and destroy their way of life, the indigenous Karen of Mutro have found their own path through climate justice. The people of the SPP continue to stand strong in the face of adversity, but the coup and the subsequent resurgence of conflict has brought a heavy toll. We call on the international community to condemn the junta, who through their actions have shown that even in the face of climate disaster, their only goals are profit and distraction. In these dire times, we also call for support of our indigenous Karen and other ethnic peoples in Burma who continue to protect their territories through these trying times. 6 years have passed since the Paris Agreement, and little has changed. The SPP is the example of the growing cascades of evidence that RPLC are essential to combating the global climate emergency. It is time for the governments of the world to recognize a simple fact. This cannot be done without us. Thank you.
Wow, excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Paul. We, as the audience, can feel the power of Indigenous people and the contribution to climate change mitigation sustainably. It's deserved to get so many awards and more even for the new generation. It's really great. Okay, there will be many questions for you as well, I believe. Let's keep it for the moment, and I would like to call for our brother, next speaker, Pong, to share another very interesting case study. Pong is an indigenous Rowan from Kachin state in northern Myanmar. He has been working very hard for contribution to climate change mitigation together with the Rowan community. The snow-capped mountain is located in his area, and it is the only one we can find in ASEAN ever. So he is going to tell us how they are trying to protect the one and only snow mountain in their area as the indigenous community. So the floor is yours, Pong.
Okay, Pamara and greeting. Today I will talk in a topic, challenge facing indigenous communities in the Myanmar Himalaya. In the context or focus on study case of the fact that happened in Kagaburuzi National Park and Pongkanruzi Wildlife Sanctuary, reflecting on my own work that in the place that I call home. Next slide, please. The Myanmar Himalaya is located where the tropical rainforests meet the eastern Himalaya in Myanmar, Kachin state. It is a place of great biodiversity. Biologists tell us that it forests features almost half of the country plant and animal species. But this is not an untouched landscape. My community, the Rawang and other indigenous communities have called this place home for more than a millennia. Next slide, please. We call it Rawang Mong, a name that carries more sense of responsibility than pride. A responsibility of care for this landscape and its diverse form of life. Next slide, please. Our traditional and customary law. Responsibility is the center of our traditional customary law. For example, how Rawang people hunt. A family or village has its own area to hunt. When you hunt from your area, but the animal don't die in your area and cross to the other family or village area, they have the way to share meat, and when they got meat, they will share it with all the village. Also, fish in the river have a limit, the way or how and the time to fish. In some area, we have a protected area, protected by our people, not the government. They cannot be fished at all. They will catch fish from this area only when the village has a festival. So this area is protected by all the communities and get benefit from all communities. And if guests from another village need food while they are traveling, they will ask to fish first. And in some cases, if you can't find the owner, maybe they go to the farm, they will fish and leave something behind for the owner. The way we hunt fish is very sustainable. If a hunter snares a female, they release it. Similarly, when they see a young animal or small animal, they will let it go, because they always think for the future, for the next generation, and it's not only meat and fish sources. We are talking about the area that if you want a bag of salt, you have to walk 6 or 7 days to go to the town and take another 6 or 7 days to come back to your village. And how they use animal is applied to how they use plant too. In Rawang medicine tradition, we find another system of tenure. Different families take responsibility for different medicine plant. Some family only tend only 1 or 2 plant. Other family take care of 20 or 30. They protect the plant. They tend to the plant in the forest, and they grow the plants at home. They keep our biodiversity alive, even as they heal our communities and keep us alive. We have a system where each family has its own responsibility, and these responsibilities are recognized by all. They have to pay attention to how the situation is changing. They have to take care of it. Next slide, please. We face a big wave of challenge from outside that we aren't familiar with. The world has changed. We face a social, economic, and political pressure. A group of people, organization came into our community like never before and make change that we can catch up with. In just 25 years, they have taken our third of Rawang Mong in National Park. Next slide, please. They want, this is about external challenge. They wanted to expand this park so that half of our country or our land would be in park. In this park, the Myanmar Forestry Department, supported by conservation group like WCS, have restrict our hunting, our harvesting, and our agriculture. They have made it illegal to hunt traditional Rawang game anymore and cut small forest field to grow food. How are we to eat? They try to stop harvesting medicine. How are we to heal ourselves? They destroy the system of channel that already work well. I don't know that I can use the word perfect, but the system we had worked in harmony with people, animal, river, and plant in sustainable way. That's why they want the national park in our Kachin state, because we had kept our environment in harmony. They came with authority, knowledge, and said your old way will no longer be needed. We will use our new way and new system to take care of it with tools and people that we can understand and are not familiar with, and our power to take care of our own land is getting less and less. The forest department officer control and arrest us, but they don't or can. Other outside people came in to take the medicine, plant, and hunt animal for sale. They let outside use electroshock fishing that make our river empty. In a few years, our fish disappear from the whole valley. Our external challenge are lack of understanding from government and international group about the way of life of indigenous people, a lack of understanding to accept, respect, and let indigenous way be part of conservation. They have tried to take away our relationship with the animal and plant in our land. We must not let them succeed. Next slide, please. And about internal challenge. From the old time, we take care of land community by community in specific area. We never cooperated across a big landscape. Instead, we were like 1,000 little conservation collective. So we didn't have the power to negotiate or bargain. We don't know rights of ourselves. We don't know the law. In a deep way, we don't understand biodiversity importance or the connection of each thing. We may understand only in our area, but not how it affects the whole country and the whole world. Like the climate change crisis, how it's all connected, we want our people to understand that we are a part of vanguard to fight to help the world in this crisis too. What they do is affect others, and the world benefit from how we have saved our land. And also it is our responsibility as human to human and to Mother Earth. The biggest internal challenge that I have seen is that our sense of ownership is getting less, especially in the national park. For the government have controlled the area for over 20 years. Our customary law, traditional way of life, how we use resources have been cut off. The old system that I have mentioned has been stopping, disconnected between generations. So what happened is some of the current generation don't understand, because all they know, all of their life is not to go to hunt, to cut or anything. They don't have a chance to follow their traditional, but only a law that control them. So the outcome, I have seen many young people are losing sense of ownership, and that scare and make us worry the most. Next slide, please. Conclusion toward global indigenous conservation. We need to bring this traditional and customary law to the front of the fight of environmental change for us and the globe. We need to recognize that around the world, these indigenous customary law are restored. Now we work to document our customary land, but land is not enough. We need to let the world know that we can manage the world endangered species for long before conservation group manage them. We did it for 100 of years and they flourish. And we have to work hard to make sure that will work in the future too. We need to empowering indigenous people by giving knowledge about their rights, encouraging communities about a duty to communities and to the earth, making a network through a community in and out. If Rawang Mong is on the map, but the Rawang people don't have a sense of responsibility or ownership, it's useless. Our goal is to restore a relationship with many species and restore indigenous conservation with a new global partner. Now we are working on document the species, the land, the ecologies we manage. We hope to join with similar effort by indigenous people across Myanmar, documenting customary law and management allows our Rawang people to collaborate with nearby people like the Lisu and the Jingpo, but it will also allow us to work with other indigenous people so that we can clarify the law of different people together. We can mobilize our hunter and our healer to be protector and leader. We can propose indigenous alternative to sustainable hunting and harvesting in dialogue with other indigenous people who manage related land in Myanmar and beyond. Documenting our knowledge is about retaking our sovereignty. Let us remake conservation together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pong Pong. It's very fantastic presentation. We all clearly see how hard your people work for protecting your land and nature in the very remote area. So as the indigenous people, we are very bond with our nature, bond with our land and forest. So we will never leave our land, our forest and our nature at all, unless no one shoot us from this area. So you all hear what have been we initiated and what we have been struggling a lot on the ground. So after listening all of the case study, now it is the time to inform you the update of Myanmar crisis and what should be done as well. So last not least, our speaker is Saw Htoo. He is also an indigenous Karen and rights activist working for Kachin as well. He has been advocating for land reform, better resource governance, social and environmental justice, and the rights of indigenous peoples and ethnic communities in conflict areas, particularly in Karen, Burma, for more than 10 years. He is going to talk about Myanmar's situation and recommendation for international community. Over to you, Saleh.
Thank you very much today. First of all, thank you all for joining the event and showing your solidarity with us today. Currently, the people of Burma has gone through bitter experiences under the military dictator's brutal rule. In the last few days, the Myanmar military bombed Thadalan city, one of the most beautiful cities in Chin State, the area where thousands of local ethnic and indigenous peoples are residing. This is a clear sign that this brutal military will not stop until it gains what it wants. I'm sending my condolences, my sorrow and sympathy to the people of Thailand, and I hope you're all safe from all forms of harms. The 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, is starting tomorrow. And as leaders of the world are gathering at Glasgow to discuss the fight against global climate change, it is important to know that the world will fail in the fight against climate change if they do not protect the forests that cover 1/3 of the surface of the earth. And it is also vital to keep in mind that we cannot protect the forest without indigenous people. As my colleague has previously mentioned in their presentations, we all know that forests do better when the rights of indigenous people and their rights to lands are recognized and respected. A study that was done in 2016 by Global Platforms of Indigenous and Community Lands showed that indigenous people and local communities manage at least 24% of the total above ground carbon store in the world's tropical forests. And this protects 80% of the world's biodiversity. Indigenous play vital roles in protecting and conserving the forest. Most of all, they are the ones saving our planet. We cannot deny that indigenous people have contributed to healthy forests and climate mitigation. However, we are still seeing the rights of indigenous people and their rights to lands have continued to be ignored and rejected by many countries around the world, including Burma. Today in Burma, the military coup that has killed more than 1,000 people sparked angers and faced resistance across the country. The military has brutally cracked down on resistances, arrested elected members of parliament, increased its brutal military campaigns in ethnic areas, burned down villages, and dropped bombs on the homes and forests of indigenous communities. And we also see the military is targeting people, including human rights defenders, forest and environmental defenders. Many of our colleagues have been arrested. Officers of many environmental civil society organizations in Burma were raided. And this shows the situation in Burma under the military will only get worse, and no one is safe in the country today. To recall some experience in the past 40 years, under the successive military dictatorships, indigenous people suffer the worst human rights violations. And also in the last 10 years, under the successive civilian governments, the indigenous peoples have continued to suffer human rights violations. Their forests, homes have been destroyed under the name of the development of the country. And also during the ceasefire period, their land and natural resources have been exploited, and they've been displaced from their homes. And a few of the worst land laws that were adopted under the successive civilian governments, to give some examples, repressive laws that adopted under the civilian governments were the vacant fallow and virgin land management law and forest law. These laws consider the territories of indigenous peoples as vacant areas. Whoever occupies this land area can be charged under criminal code for illegally occupying the land or forest without the permission of the state. More than that, the government used these repressive laws to legally take land from the communities. And then we have seen large-scale plantations, top-down environmental conservations, and many other investment projects have been expanded in indigenous people's territories under the rule of civilian governments. Under this very centralized control system and repressive laws, the indigenous people have no room to breathe, and their efforts to protect and conserve the forest through their customary land management system have always been ignored. However, in the last 10 years, we have seen many indigenous people have publicly launched their self-territorial management areas in their respective territories, including some of the territories that my colleagues have previously mentioned in their presentation. This shows even under pressure, the indigenous people of Burma remain determined to protect, maintain, and continue to practice their customary land management systems that have actively protected the forest, water, land, sustainable livelihoods, and most importantly, they remain one of the most resistant group, and they maintain the ecological systems of the environment and contribute to climate change and adaptation. As my colleagues have discussed in their presentations, these customary land management systems of indigenous people are being practiced for generations after generations. And these practices are based on culture and traditional territorial management systems that are deeply connected to land, forest, water, and the environment. And these customary land management systems constitute the foundation of environmental governance, which has huge contribution to the reduction of carbon emissions and climate mitigation. Once again, the February 1st military coup has led to the resume of widespread armed conflicts across the country, poses serious threats to the life of indigenous people and their effort to protect and maintain their forests, land, and environment. There will be more pressure on the forest, land, and environments as a result of increased armed conflict in indigenous people's territories. We all know that the current military coup leaders are desperate for money to keep their power and continue to crush those who ever against them. This means the return of illicit economy. Cronies who were responsible for enormous deforestation in the past 40 years, they will return. The current military coup will open up opportunities for massive exploitations of natural resources, and the increase of deforestation will gross human rights violations. And it is too clear that the military junta has never been interested in any of the environment conservations, climate mitigation, and climate adaptation. If we look at the Myanmar military's entire history, it's all about natural resources exploitations. The current military coup is failing as the people across the country continue to resist and oppose it. These military coup leaders have continued to face pressure from all fronts, including thousands of civil servants engaging in civil disobedience movements. The people across the country refuse to pay tax. International sanctions have increased, and so on. They need more money than before. Given their desperate need for money, these military coup leaders will do whatever they want to get the money, and whatever they can to get the money. Indigenous peoples' land and water governance systems, they have proven to sustain a healthy, biodiversity-rich forest that provides people with resilient forms of livelihoods are under severe pressure and risk of destruction. The result will mean nature and humans are less able to absorb the damage and threats that result from climate-induced extreme weather patterns. The 73 years of armed conflict and the ongoing political instability in Burma show that we need a political solution. Since the coup in February 1st, it is once again clear to everyone that a healthy forest and climate mitigation all depends on a political solution. The situation today, the forests, the rivers, the indigenous people communities, the well-being of the people of Burma are all under threat. Everything, including natural conservation, is political right now in Burma. More than ever before, if you look at what is happening on the ground today, the idea of natural conservation is unrealistic under unstable political situation. So we need international communities, including donors, governments, conservation agencies, if they care about the importance of our forests and the contribution of our country to global climate mitigation. We urge you to support the political struggle of the people of Burma. We need a democratic federal system where we, the indigenous people, can raise our voices, have the freedom to govern our lands, forests, and rivers, and determine ourselves the future of precious natural resources on our own land. The Hondan's economic plans, as well as the side effect of the nationwide conflict sparked by the coup, pose huge serious for the country's forests. Degraded forests and rivers mean it is no longer possible for people to count on nature to help mitigate the worst impact of climate change. This is of huge concern of all of Burma. In the indigenous territories, the best hope to prevent this horrible scenario from happening is to rely on indigenous people's forest, land, and rivers management systems. It is important that the conservation organizations, donors, and governments to recognize and actively support it. Practically, you can start doing this today. By working with local and indigenous communities, this will help support the indigenous people who got these territories, as well as millions of people in Burma who depend on the health of rivers, forests. We have a chance to mitigate the worst effects of the climate crisis in the future. To conclude, it is important to know that the international communities will continue to fail in their fight against climate change if they fail to legally recognize the rights of indigenous people and their rights to land, and the customary land and forest management system, which is the foundation of environmental governance. So we call on the international communities and world leaders joining the UN Climate Change Conference COP26 today, that is starting tomorrow, to adopt resolution that encourage countries around the world to scale up and protect the customary land systems of indigenous peoples by legalizing and recognizing them in the height of the country as national law. We urge the international communities to empower and support the indigenous communities to continue the historical roles as stewardship of the environment and make the indigenous community as part of the global climate solution, and incorporate their practices, mainly the customary land and forest management systems, as part of the nationally determined contributions, and work directly with the indigenous community, scale up financial and technical support their initiatives, strengthen the institutions that safeguard the forest, land, and environment. And finally, we call on the international community to support the people of Burma in their struggle for the building of federal democracy in the country. And we ask the international communities not to legitimize this military junta by engaging with them, invite them to join or involve them in any platform of international events. And under no circumstances, the international communities must not provide any support to the military junta and ensure they do not politically and financially benefit from any response they made in response to the needs in Burma. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, So Alex, for your concise update and the wonderful recommendation to the international community. I'm definitely sure that the international community will heard what you all said and have idea of support to Myanmar, particularly to the indigenous people. So I also want to echo what Sola said in his talk. Please don't engage in any single way with the inhuman SAC or military at all. They are killing us. They are vanishing us. We are desperately running in with the sake of our life. So now it is the time for questions and answer. So for this session, I want to call for all panelists to answer all the questions directly addressed to you in the chat box. But I saw only one question is addressed into the first speaker, and the rest are more on the general. Whoever who can answer, you can jam in. So, and also I would like to invite Holly from ICCO to help us for international context question as well. And those who would like to raise a question directly, you can raise your hands up so we can give a time for you as well. So before we go to the direct question, for the sake of time, I would like to collect 3 questions first, and then it answer in the chat box. So for the first question, I would like to call for the first speaker. I think it is addressed into the Esther Wah. No, Esther Wah. What are the challenges to manage natural resources, including forest sustainability, within the context of federal democratic ways in Myanmar that we all want? Esther Wah.
Thank you. So the main challenges is that is recognition and protection of indigenous territories and tenure security. And then indigenous community must be first of all empowered and included in the policy decision making. Indigenous people rights must be guaranteed by constitution. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. And then if my answer is not answering your question, other speaker can answer it too.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anyone who would like to add up upon the Esther's answer? Okay, so let's move on to hello. Yes, Frank.
Yes, I would like to respond to Sia Wu's questions. And actually, I know that I cannot answer exactly what he asked, because he asked the challenges, but actually his question is a challenge for us to answer also. So for me, it is a challenge because it is depend on how people look at the resources. For us, many people look at the resources as a things. Things mean properties or without life. But if we can change the people's paradigm of things to like a creature or as a life, I think that can be sustainable in future, our resources, no? Because like many indigenous people, they believe that the rivers have life, forests, mountains have life, and all these are like a creature and the Lord, and they have to respect. So whatever they utilize, they have to respect. So I think it is important to advocate like in future democratic federal democratic system, how to consider about resources federalism into sustainable way by applying the indigenous knowledge, wisdom, principle, and concept. Thank you.
Can I add something to Sia Friend's answer to Sia Wu's question?
Yes,
just it is very important that, let's say, we are in a democratic system and federal system that we have long looking for. I think the most important thing is to ensure that we are working to make sure that the indigenous people rights are recognized at the highest national law of the country, and that their rights being protected, and their system that they have been practicing and for generations are granted and under protection of the law. And that we should also work closely together with them, encourage them, and ensure that they are part of the decision making in any decision that the country's made in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for the question that is not addressing to anyone, so please jump into all the panelists. What is the definition of IP in Myanmar? How different from UN and Indigenous themselves? How can we distinguish IP and ethnic people? How can we know the territories of IP? Open to you all panelists, please.
Oh, ဘယ်သူမှမပြောင်းဆိုကျွန်တော်အရေးပြန်လိုက်မယ်နော်ဘာမှလို့ကျွန်တော်ပြောလိုက်မယ်နော်ဟိုဘာသာပြန်နေပြီးတော့မှအိတ်ကလေးလို့ဥစားပြပေးလိမ့်မယ်နော်
Okay.
ဒါတော့ဥစားလေဒီဟို indigenous လို့ဌာနေတိုင်းသားလို့ပြောလို့ရှိရင်တော့ဟိုကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီအဓိပ္ပာယ်ဖွင့်ဆိုချက်တွေရှိတယ်ပေါ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဌာနေတိုင်းသားပြောလို့ရှိရင်ဌာနေတိုင်းသားဆိုတဲ့အဓိပ္ပာယ်ကနော်သူတို့နယ်မြေရှိတယ်နော်သူတို့သီးသန့် unique culture tradition သူတို့စီမံခန့်ခွဲတဲ့ဒီစနစ်တွေရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးတော့သူတို့ကအခုလက်ရှိပြောရမယ်ဆိုရင်ဒီသူတို့ရဲ့တီးသန့်နေမျိုးစီမှာခါခွဲတယ်သူတို့ဒီအခုနပြောနေတဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီနိုင်ငံရဲ့အုပ်စိုးမှုစနစ်နဲ့တွားပြီးတော့မှတူမနေဘူးပေါ့နော်။နောက်အဲ့ဒီအတွက်သူတို့ရဲ့ဒီ indigenous ဌာနေတိုင်းရင်းသားတွေရဲ့ဒီအဓိပ္ပာယ်ဖွင့်ဆိုမှုက territory ပါတယ်သူတို့အခွင့်အရေးတခြားခုနပြော traditional culture တွေအကုန်လုံးပါတယ်ပေါ့ဌာနေတိုင်းရင်းသားလို့ပြောလို့ရှိရင် territory ပါလာတယ်နော်သူတို့မပါလို့သူတို့ရဲ့ territory rights ကိုမပါလို့မရဘူးပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့ဒီဟာကလည်းဒီ UN ဒီ2009ဒီ UN drip ကနေအသိမှတ်ပြုထားတာလည်းပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီဌာနေတိုင်းရင်းသားမြန်မာပြည်အခြေအနေနဲ့ကြည့်မယ်ဆိုရင်ဌာနေတိုင်းရင်းသားလို့ပြောလို့ရှိရင်ကျွန်တော် ethnic နဲ့ဘယ်လိုကွာတယ်လဲပေါ့ဒါတော့ခဏကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီမေးခံတယ်မေးကိုပေါ့နော်ဟိုကျွန်တော်မြန်မာပြည်မှာတမိုင်းတစ်လျှောက်ကြည့်မယ်ဆိုရင်ဌာနေတိုင်းရင်းသားကိုအစိုးရဆက်ဆက်ကတခါမှအသိမှမပြုခဲ့ဘူးနော်ဌာနေတိုင်းသားတွေအားလုံးကို ethnic နော်တိုင်းရင်းသားဆိုပြီးတော့မှအားလုံးခြုံပြီးတော့မှသူတို့ divided rule လို့ခေါ်တဲ့ဒီခေတ်ဆက်ဆက်ကဆရာနာရှင်တွေရဲ့အုပ်ချုပ်မှုတွေအောင်မြင်ဖို့အတွက်သူတို့ကြည့်တောင်းလာတဲ့စနစ်ဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီအတွက်ဒီဌာနေတိုင်းရင်းသားကကျွန်တော်တို့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့ platform မှာမြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့ဒီနိုင်ငံရေးဆွေးနွေးပွဲမှာမြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီနိုင်ငံအခင်းအကျင်းမှာတခါမှကြည့်လဲဆွေးနွေးပြီးတော့ပြောဆိုတာကျွန်တော်တို့မတွေ့ရဘူးနော်ဒါပေမဲ့လည်း ethnic issues ဆိုနိုင်ငံကျွန်တော်တို့ကသွားနေတဲ့ဒီတော်လှန်ရေးကိစ္စတွေပြီးဒီနှစ်ပေါင်း80ကျော်တိုက်ပွဲကိစ္စတွေနော်ဒါကြည့်မှဆိုနိုင်ငံရေးကိုတီးသန့်နော်တိုင်းသားတွေလူလာခဲ့တယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့လွတ်လပ်ရေးမတိုင်ခင်ကလူလာပြီးမှတောင်းဆိုခဲ့တဲ့ဒီ political struggle လို့ပြောရမှာပေါ့နော်ဒါပေမဲ့ဒီ indigenous ကဒီပို့ပြီးတော့မှနော်ခုနကျွန်တော်တို့ပြောတဲ့သူ့ရဲ့ territory နဲ့သူ့ရဲ့ unique culture tradition နဲ့သူတို့ system တွေရှိနေတဲ့အတွက်ဒီဟာတွေကနော်ဒီလာမယ့်အနာဂတ်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီနော်နိုင်ငံအခင်းအကျင်းမှာသူတို့တွေကိုနော်အတိမပြုတ်ပြီးတော့မှတကယ်ဟိုစားဖြစ်ဖို့လိုတယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုဒါမှသာကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီခုနပြောတဲ့ဒီနော်ကျွန်တော်တို့မြေတစ်တော်နော် environment တွေကျွန်တော်တို့ဆက်လက်ပြီးတော့မှထိသိကောက်ွယ်ပြီးတော့မှဒီ climate change ပေါ့နော်ရတဲ့လူပြောလဲ mitigation နဲ့ adaptation ကျွန်တော်တို့အများကြီးလုပ်နိုင်တယ်ဒီလောက်ပါပဲကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်
တခြားဆရာမတွေရောဖြေအောင်မလားရှင် So okay so thank you Silas and the next question is from Ben following the first February coup what should the UN and wildlife NGOs be doing to support indigenous community and their stewardship of the forest its biodiversity and its carbon storage should they continue operating in Myanmar and if so how he is asking about this question and anyone can jump in and answer for that
okay so That's a very good question. Yes, it's very difficult that for the international NGOs to really operate in this current political environment, and at the same time, you know, like the issues really on the ground is very challenging because of after the coup, you know, many territories are facing big threats. So that's why in our recommendation, we recommend that the international communities, NGOs to support and work with the indigenous people directly, or the civil societies, if as much as possible, that would be our recommendation. And at the same time, if they continue to stay in the country, they need to also re-strategize the way they do conservation activities without really legitimizing the council, the military council. And then most of the work, they need to really support the communities and our communities organizations or indigenous people's organizations across the country, because only through them the project's implementation will succeed, because of the local communities know the situation well, and they also can reduce and minimize the risks on the ground. And another issue is really important is that at this moment, we also want the international NGOs and donors to really understand the challenges that we are facing today in the country. As we all know, that the banking systems also collapsed, and also the registration issues, all these things that they need to understand, and they really also relax their requirements, the financial requirements, as well as other legal requirements, and to really support groups. Even the unregistered groups should be also eligible to apply for funding supports, and as well as also to also what do you call it, require less documents, and as when as possible also to also target also for these relief activities, not just development activities. And that's all I have, and maybe other colleagues can also add. Thank you.
Thank you, Sopal. Anyone who wants to add it on Sopal's point? Okay, so thank you again. And I saw a couple of questions from Niniwin and other audience as well. But before we move into those questions, I would like to bring one of the questions regarding the SPP, the Sullivan Peace Parks as well. So anonymous, one of the anonymous is raising a question: what extent are the livelihood inside SPP are linked to the external markets, or are they all completely subsistence oriented? I think Sopal, please.
Actually, I answer back to the anonymous person, but actually I can also say here, really in the really peacetime or lack of conflict time, we can say, communities are quite subsistence, or they depend much on their own, like agriculture produced, and only some business necessities they traded with nearby communities or along the Thai-Burma border. So this is the kind of traditional or local markets kind of systems. But really in the conflict time, especially in the, you can say the high time now, that really difficult because of, and also because of COVID-19 and lockdowns and close down of border trades also creates problems, as not just, I think, not just the people in the Sullivan Peace Park, but across the country and also across the globe. So yeah, so and because of armed conflicts and the displacement, really people cannot really tend to their farming activities and other things. So they also depend on the humanitarian assistance. I think that is applied to every communities in Burma, Myanmar now. That's also in terms of man-made disaster. Like you need to also depend on the external humanitarian support. And then and in the future, in our kind of development plan, of course, we also will define our own way of like doing the local or promoting local economy. That's also we interact with external markets, but we should develop our own terms. Yes.
Thank you, Sapol. And also, I would like to go back to the Nini Win's question. So there are two questions she raised up. Is there any specific reason why UNFCCC did choose SAC report then NUG, please? What is the major governance issue, challenges for conservation work and indigenous rights to learn in the mixed control area, contested area, please? Over to you, all panelists. Who is going to start?
Hello, I will try to
Yes,
answer like Nini Win's questions. One of the two questions only. So regarding the SAC report, I think we have to understand how the Western society look at to the Myanmar. For me, I think they look at that the report has been written since the previous government. And at the same time, they may distinguish between people servant and then the military regime. So, but as we are the people from Myanmar, we know when the report is submitted by whatever government servants or people servant or whatever, like it is also can be legitimized to the SAC. So this is what we are knowing. But from the Western society, they may look into the different to what we look into the report. That is what I try to answer the question.
Thank you, Frank. Yes, Sapol.
Yeah, I think that's the first question about that. I think that we are not in a position to answer for UNFCCC. No? They should answer that to you or to us either also. Because yeah, we don't like the report as it didn't reflect upon our indigenous people's kind of desire. And the second question about the governance issues or challenges, right, in the conflict area, right? Contested area.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's always issues of tenure issues, because in those areas, it's sort of mostly becomes a kind of what you call it, no man's land or something like that. And then like if the armed groups really don't have their principles and policy, they will like focus on the extraction. But really in the area where KNU has controlled the territories, because of the KNU has its resource policy, for example, land and forest policies. So like as much as possible, they empower local communities to really manage and use their territory or their forest sustainably, for example, the community forest. So in area where communities has the right to establish and manage as communities forest, they have their kind of authorities to really stop the unsustainable exploitation. And then by working with also other CSO, they also speak out against any injustices. So we can see that in throughout our kind of supported project area, we can see that after 10 years, community forests have done very well. we can see clearly that we can see clearly that they can stop the degradation or deforestation, community forest. Yeah, but in really the other areas that the KNU has less control, and with other ethnic armed groups, it's very difficult. And you can see many issues like land grabbing issues, for example, during the kind of ceasefire time, from around 2010 to until now and until the coup.
Thank you. There are a couple of follow-up questions, I guess so, but I will go with the Syria member first. So I think we should go to the question from the anonymous. Is there anything we need to know about the role of women in caring for the forest and the planet? So this is from one of the audience. Who is going to respond this question, please?
Which question, Shama?
Yes.
Which question?
The question is there anything we need to know about the role of women in caring for the forest and the planet?
Okay, I think Shama Esther Wah should respond to that.
Okay, Shama Esther.
Okay, I will answer in the Burmese. So, Jamado Wale, the Lopium, the forest, Kaisana Pate, which Jamado, the amused media, Robono, Jamado, let to ma Blumiales or the amused media, Kankada, Yichi Bono, the forest nepate pido, Papiles or the doga, let to a bono, let to Buama bono, below shade. A chicken got Sakolo bono, to do net chase at the mushin in there, Uma, Emma, Sapo Tapoga, Sabono, below shade, the Epiman. The Saza Sharaga sa team bono ema meet chep hitchem water tinga sa Koya Mida Zujama Nimagam Pitle Tema, the those Kupo bono, Sega Sabono, Editito Gani Yade, as Rodruya Nizi, Boale Pamuka bono, the Tito ne Chesemushi bono, Ejamo, Jamasuluchinaga. The woman, the amused me at Kangadaga bono, the Tito Tede de Paima, the Tito Nepate Amyaji, Teyamushi bono, Ejamulo le Jamadu di Gio Malemi Yare bono, the amused media at Kangadaga bono, the Lupiomla, the Tito Tede Yema, to Adika. Di Tito, Blupium, di Tito, Kaisane Tologa, Colombono, Adiga to do a multimedia, Adiga Yiji, Canada, Kuma, Shinide, so the how Jama, Piocine Bono. So Ratamado, the multimedia, the Tito, Kaisane Patelai, Bono, a multimedia, Roga, Yiji Bade, Bono, Tamado, Melo Miaba, Bubo, Tisuti Mare, Janet to repeat, Piolo Yabade.
Who is going to add to Esther's response? Okay, so yeah, thank you. Thank you, Noh Esther Wah. And we have another question that is from Tatetyo. Following the coup, what are the major challenges for the indigenous groups to survive and continue their work? Second question is, what kind of concrete support from international community would you expect more to keep your work doing during this challenging time? Who is going to respond, please? Support?
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe Frank in Hebrew, you want to go first?
Yeah. Frank Hebrew?
You just go ahead. I'm thinking for.
Are you going to respond?
Or Sia Pong, please help also.
Okay. Pompon, are you going to address this question? Hello.
Can you give me the question again, please?
Yeah. There are two questions. One question is following the coup, what are the major challenges for the indigenous groups to survive and continue their work? The second question is what kind of concrete support from international community would you expect more to keep your work doing during this challenging time?
I think I can answer only on the first question. In my area in Htoo, every activity about what we are doing is, how to say, is stopped now, is on pause. So we don't really know what will happen in the future. And so many of my friends that we work together go to the jungle for different reasons. So I don't really know what will happen in the future.
Okay, I think, okay, okay.
ကျွန်တော်နည်းနည်းလေးထပ်ဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်ဘာမှလိုပဲပြောနည်းနည်းလေးဖြစ်ဆွဲပြီးတော့မှဥစားထည့်ချင်တာကလေကျွန်တော်တို့ကလည်းရှိဒီကိုဗစ်ကြောက်ပေါ့နော်ကိုဗစ်အထေးကြောက်ဒီပြောရမယ်ဆိုဒီလူစုလူဝေးတွေလုပ်လို့မရတဲ့အတွက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီဌာနေတိုင်းရင်းသားတွေပုံမှန်ဆိုတွေတို့တို့ဒီတွေ့ကြတဲ့ event တွေလုပ်ကြတယ် peace ceremony တွေလုပ်ကြတယ်ပေါ့ဒါအပုံမှန်ဖြစ်နေတဲ့အခင်းကြီးပေါ့နော်ဒါပေမဲ့လည်းအခုကိုဗစ်19ကြောက်ဒီ gathering တွေဒါလို့မရတော့ဘူးပေါ့နော်ဒါတော့စိတ်ခေါ်မှုလက်ရှိဒီဆက်တဲ့စိတ်ခေါ်မှုတစ်ခုဖြစ်တော့မှာနောက်ထပ်ကြီးတဲ့စိတ်ခေါ်မှုကျွန်တော်တို့သိတဲ့အတိုင်းပဲအာနာဆီယနာတိုင်ပြီးတဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာပို့ဆိုးလာတာကနော်ဒီဌာနေတိုင်းတရှိတဲ့ဒေသမှာစစ်ပွဲတွေအများကြီးပြဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီကီပီနယ်ထဲမှာဆိုရင်နော်ဒီတန်လွေဘက်မှာနော်လင်းနဲ့နော်လာပြစ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့အဲ့ဒီမှာနေတဲ့လူတွေတော်တော်များများကနော်သူတို့ဒီဘုတ်ခုချင်းတွေပြင်ဘုတ်ခုချင်းတွေလူတိုင်းလိုဘုတ်ခုချင်းတူးပြီးတော့မှညဆိုဘုတ်ခုချင်းတွေမှာအိပ်ပြီးတော့နေရတဲ့အနေထားရှိတယ်မှာဆိုတော့ဒီ COVID-19 အပြင်နော်ဒီအာဏာသိမ်းမှုကနေပြန်ပြီးတော့ပေါ်လာတဲ့တကြော့ပြန်နော်ဒီစိတ်ပွဲကကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီသူတဖြစ်ဌာနေတိုင်းသားတွေရဲ့ဆူဆီးမှုဌာနေတိုင်းသားတွေရဲ့ဒီဘောနေထိုင်မှုနဲ့ဌာနေတိုင်းသားတွေရဲ့သူတို့ဒီဟိုစားဖြစ်အများကြီးချေချောက်မှုဖြစ်စေတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါတော့လက်ရှိရေဆိုင်နေရတဲ့အခြေအနေပေါ့ဆရာပေါ်ဟိုဖြစ်ဆွဲပြီးပြောပြပါ
Yes, or actually I already addressed some already, like this question, these two questions. Like for example, in my presentation, I talk about the role of the Salin Peace Park governance or the General Assembly and the governing committee. That during these times we need to really work together and coordinate. And the really important is to really keep our communication alive. So we are really looking for support to really communicate with our communities in different places. And if there's an emergency, and we can also respond, right? So we all know that the problems in the country when they shut down the phone line and internet and something like that, then we need to use other means, like radio walkie-talkie, for example, and other satellite phones and something like this. Like if we have donors to support that kind of equipments, then I think that it will help indigenous leaders and the ethnic CSOs or indigenous people's organizations a lot in terms of this difficult time. And then for the international communities, as I already said, they need to share also risk with us, and by asking really less questions about all the lock-frame things and like that, and making it more flexible. And then also, as I said, also support the maintaining of the human resources at the civil society organizations, and supporting the kind of also overhead costs, as I may say. And then also they also should be able to also communicate with their colleagues that are in hidings, and this kind of things is very needed. And also in terms of really that they need to relocate from different places to a safer place, I think they need also support like that, yeah.
Thank you so much, Solas, Pong and Paul. And there are a couple of questions from both chat box and question and answer box. So I want to collect for 3 questions, I think, in one time. So the first question is from Mike Jury. How the increasing internal migration of people of Burma is affecting the homogeneity and territorial stewardship of indigenous communities. This is from Mike. And another question from Ton Bars. He is talking about the things indigenous people have for centuries adapted to changes in the environment. With an increasing speed of changes due to human activities, people need to adapt much faster. Even if people are allowed to take care of their own land, does this cause challenges that are almost impossible to take on? I think just 2 questions enough to answer. So who is going to start to respond these 2 questions, please? Frank Ambrew. Or so Alex?
The first question, the first question is from Marjorie.
Marjorie, yes.
About the internal migration.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's really is in the authority of the indigenous communities and the governance institution that you know, like they of course they will like host the people who are in troubles, provide them humanitarian support if they have food and other shelters and things like that. And but I think they have the local rules and regulations like that. So I think that's it's depend on each communities like how to share the resources if those like new settlers or new migrants people are coming into their territories. I think that they need to you know, apply that, and also working together with the local governments. Like if in KNU control area, the KNU also have their policies. So I think they have to work together. I think that's not a big issue. And then the second question is, I really don't get it.
Yeah, the second question is in the chat box. It's from Ton Bars. He is talking about indigenous people have for centuries adapted to changes in the environment. With an increasing speed of changes due to human activities, people need to adapt much faster. So even if people are allowed to take care of their own land, does this cause challenges that are almost impossible to take on?
Yes, I agree with that in principle, but really the adaptation is really also based upon whether the indigenous people's rights are being recognized, protected, and promoted. Like Soil has already covered it, right? So if you are poor, you don't have any rights and anything like that, and then you have a big companies coming to grab your lands and or even build a dams that flood your area. So what's it going to do? You know, like you have don't have any place to complain and get justice. So I think that's it has to go both ways, and then the community themselves has proven in you know, many kind of years and millennium, I can say that they have been doing that, and until today we have seen the most of the you know, like best forest and biodiversity remain in the indigenous communities kind of control areas, whether they've been there recognized by the government or not.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is there anyone who would like to? Yeah, Frank.
Yes, sir. I would like to jump into the questions asked by, I think, young generations, and the name is mentioned Htoo or Htoo, I don't know. but in English it's very difficult to pronounce in Korean. And he or she is asking, like, I am still confusing. Maybe my question is similar to the previous question. I am a Karen born in the refugee camp. Am I Karen, Watulipo, or just ordinary Karen? I think it is very important, and I would like to respond to the questions. So my simple question is, no one can judge whether you are indigenous people or not. No, there is no exact definition to the indigenous people. It is up to you. How do you value yourself regarding forest, rivers, and land? The important thing is, how do you try to make yourself interrelated to forests, rivers, and land? I think that is important. However, I'm how to say, unfair to say like that, because you were born in refugee camp, you spend your life there, and there is no natural resources surrounding that you can touch, you can feel, you can practice. I think this is, I would like to say, the consequence of our armed conflict in our country. Thank you, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frank, that you already addressed the question of that. I didn't raise it yet. So another question coming up in the question Q&A box, that is from Htoo, asking about what is your expectation or achievable goal as the indigenous regarding with natural resource governance in your ethnic area in next 3 to 5 years? For example, when the Federal Democratic Constitution has been finalized in the near future, what would you set up as the practical goal for this at least? Anyone who would like to address first?
Yeah, well, I mean, as we already show the case studies that we cannot wait until, something happen like Federal Democratic Union or, or whatever, political settlement we will have. But at the same time, we have to keep doing what we've been doing in order to safeguard the remaining forest or the remaining biodiversity in our territories, no matter what. So as we've been doing that, and as clearly as we can see in the last 10 years, when this political space opening, many indigenous communities across the country have been really encouraged and empowered to start to really initiate their territory stewardship. And then we kind of coming up from really a small community to the landscape level, or even sub landscape and landscape levels. So we are looking at more like a landscape approach, and how really we need to really keep maintaining the corridors or the connectivity of our kind of ecological spaces and ecological territories across the country. So that is our aims, to really work with different ethnic governments, and also within each kind of territories, like in Karen or Kothule area, we also have to work with the KNU to be the leading body to really convene the multi-stakeholders to really agree on a really long-term plan to establish really how do we kind of use our territories, our land for future development, like which area is supposed to be kept intact or protected for ecological services, which area has to be for agriculture and others use, and which area has to be allocated for mining, for example. We need to have that visions and plan and work already from now. And then when we have more rights in the future, communities can also involve directly in really formulating and articulating, the kind of bottom-up development plans. And by that, and we will have more like we call it, protect our forests. Otherwise, like each government agency will do different thing. We do mining, we'll do logging, we do other, dam project here and there, and everything will be very messy. So this is why our vision is that we want to really work together with civil societies and other international actors and also donors to really support us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Frank, you have any more to add?
No.
Okay, thank you. So I think we all addressed all the questions raised by the audience. And if there any follow-up question you would like to raise, you can jump in now. Please raise your hand. And I think Only has a few follow-up, but it's okay with what you all answer. You are happy with the answer and the response from the panelists. So is there anyone who would like to come up with a burning question for the last time, please? Okay, so now we are closing the event. And despite the potential risks, the panelists have decided to speak out in the midst of the political crisis to be heard by the international community. While we were trying very hard to have this event, some of the international organizations deny even to post this announcement on their website, as they do not want to affect their relationship with SAC. I wonder the principle of those organizations, why they are saying rights issue. This is what our real painful experience that we are facing for the moment. Therefore, I would like to repeat again to all international community, don't ever think about to engage the terrorist military or SAC, and if you do, you are part of the crime. For all the indigenous speakers, I salute all of your courage, power, and will to protect your people and land and beautiful nature. It is so inspiring event, and it is a pleasure to become a host for this event as well. I'm so proud for all of with you to work here. Finally, I also would like to extend a warm thank you to EIA and ICCA Consortium, who have stood closely by us through our struggle, especially to Faith, Emma, and Jack for your tireless support to us and this event along the journey of preparation. Without your encouragement and hard work, it cannot be happen, and really appreciate your passion of working with Myanmar Indigenous people. I should not forget to say thank you to Holly and Pooven for your readiness to provide your assistance in any time. My appreciation goes to all the wonderful speakers of our Indigenous communities in Myanmar. I want to emphasize to thank to all our other friends, organizations, networks, allies who have stood in solidarity with us along this difficult time. Last not least, thanks again for your time to all your audience to join this webinar with interest. Thank you again and see you soon in another time. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Questions, yes. Very interesting questions.
And we see that there are many people we have to work together in future.
Yes.